All right. Well, I apologize for the miscommunication or whatever has happened, but I'm glad to pitch in. And vegetable gardening is something that I love to talk about. So let's talk veggies. And Blake's right. This is the perfect time of year to start your vegetable gardening. So here we go. Let me figure out how to move the slides. Okay. Excuse me. Going back. So the very first thing you've got to figure out is where are you going to put your garden? And the very first and most important piece is that you have got to have sunlight, sun, sun, sun. And this is at least 6 hours of full sun. So a lot of our homes aren't endowed with all that much sunlight. I am sunlight challenged in my yard. So I actually do a fair amount of vegetable gardening in containers because those are easier to locate in sunny places. But if you don't have the sun, you are not going to be able to have good crop production. So there on the south end of your property would be best for sun for the entire day, but you work with what you've got. The third thing on this list, but I think it comes under sunlight or after sunlight, is your soil. You've got to have the proper nutrients in order to grow plants that are going to produce fruits and vegetables. So we highly recommend for any gardening that you do that you have soil testing done. And the state of North Carolina is awesome because they offer free soil testing. It's free from April, the beginning of April through just about Thanksgiving or maybe the beginning of November. I'm not exactly sure of those dates, but these are done with little boxes that you fill with soil, an aggregate of soil from the areas that you're going to be gardening in. You drop it off at the agronomics division of the state over on it's over near the fairgrounds. Our office can give you specifics, and we also have the kits for you to use for putting your soil into. But you send it to them, they test it, and you will get a report that tells you about the composition of your soil and any amendments that they recommend that you add. It's better to know what is in your soil before you add these amendments because you may be doing harm rather than good for your plants by adding things that is not needed. And a lot of these amendments end up in our water table, in our water system, and that's not a good thing. We don't want chemicals there. So making sure that you are adding things to your soil that it really needs and can use. So call our office, and our number is going to be at the end of this presentation, and you can find out more about the soil testing. You also have to water a lot. North Carolina is known for our periods of lots and lots of rain, our deluges of rain, and then long periods of time where we're super, super dry, especially in the summer. So you're going to have to keep an eye on the watering and making sure you do that if Mother Nature does not do that for you. And something that a lot of people don't think about with their plants is that they need air circulation. It's got to be able to get in and around our plants. It makes their stems stronger. It helps with keeping diseases at bay. So making sure that you have enough room to actually garden is really important. So like I said, a minimum of 6 hours of sun, 8 to 10 hours is best. Close to the house means if your garden area is so far away that you're not going to go over there often, or it's going to be a chore to actually go and garden, you're not going to do that, especially when it comes to watering, especially in the middle of July when it's hot and humid and gardening turns into a chore. The further away from where you live, the harder it is to get yourself motivated to do that. And again, we've got soil testing in capital letters because you need to do it, and water, of course. If you don't have a water source that's nearby, that's going to be a problem because I will tell you, hauling water to a garden site, again, in the middle of even late June is going to be hot, but all through July and August can get to be pretty tedious pretty quickly. I mentioned container gardening earlier. Most things can be grown in containers, which is awesome because, again, you can put it in spaces where you do have the sun, and a lot of green things are beautiful in general. So a lot of our crops can be used as ornamentation as well as growing food for you. And if you have a small yard or a small place, I mean, they can be done on balconies of apartment buildings or condos. So container gardening is fabulous. You do need to make sure that whatever containers you're gardening in have good drainage. There need to be holes in the bottom. And as you see these in the picture, they're lifted up so that the water can drain out. But then the flip side of that is your water can drain out. So you have to be even more careful about making sure you're watering frequently and thoroughly. You can use different sizes of pots, but of course, the size of pot needs to match the size of the crop that you're growing, the plants that you're growing. So too small is not good. The roots need space to grow, and they can be a lot of fun. You can use a lot of different things. These are some of those, it looks like the containers that are often at the front doors of houses, and they have done a really creative thing by using some kind of pedestals to lift them up. But my kids grew things in old rubber boots one year and had a boot garden of sorts, and it was a lot of fun for them. Of course, we made holes in the bottom of all the boots. They were not boots that were being used anymore. And then again, the soil and having the right fertility there, the right nutrients for your plants is just as important in containers as it is for the soil if you're planting in the ground. Can't stress enough, the location needs to be good with lots and lots of sun. You get your bed ready if you're going in using the ground. This says tilling the ground. We don't necessarily recommend that every year because every time you till the ground, you are bringing up more weed seeds to the light up to the top. And that's what they need to germinate is that light along with the right nutrients and water. So if you've got a prepared bed already, you probably don't need to till it every year, especially if you're adding lots of good compost or maybe mulch or a cover crop in the winter. You don't need to do that. But if it's new soil, of course, you're going to need to dig it up. You need to break that soil up. And as you know, here in North Carolina, we have that good red clay, which is in fact very good. It's full of lots of nutrients. It holds moisture well. It's good for lots of things to grow in, but it needs to be broken up with some organic material because otherwise it's just this ball of clay almost. So if you're breaking new ground, make sure that you break that native soil up really well and add in some kind of compost organic material into it to make that soil more productive. The plants are going to need to be able to grow the roots down in that. There needs to be air pockets for the air for the roots and also for water to get through. So amending that soil with compost is going to be really, really important. Of course, you want to take out as many of the weeds and all the grass that's around because anything that's in your garden plot that is not your garden specific plants, that's going to be fighting for the nutrients. Those weeds, roots, grass seeds, grass roots are going to be competing for all the good nutrients and water, and we don't want those in there. And then, like I said, once you know what your soil already has in it, you may need to amend it with some kind of fertilizers, lime. There's a number of things that the soil might need, and you need to know first before you add anything in. Then I mentioned adding some organic material in there. So you can buy compost, but it's even easier to make your own. But if you're just starting out, you may not have that. But rotten leaves, green when you're making compost, there are three things that you need. You need some brown, which would be something like rotting leaves, small sticks, pine straw, that kind of stuff that's going to break down. But you also need green stuff, which is the newer organic material. So this would be your table scraps, lawn clippings, things that started as living more recently. And then it needs some water. And over time, that breaks down and makes this amazing, fertile stuff that will help your plants grow. So you may need to start out by buying some of that, but then we recommend that you start making your own and using things, the scraps and things that are left over from your own home and in your own yard to create your own compost. You can use composted manure. It's not recommended that you use new manure. It needs to have some time to break down. I mentioned cover crops. These are things like clover, and there are some grasses that you can plant on garden beds that help to reestablish some of the nutrients that were taken out by the plants you used in the previous year. They can add a lot of nitrogen back into the soil and other nutrients. So that's an idea. And it also will help combat weeds coming up, because those cover crops can hopefully make sure that they're not popping up as much. And then decomposed material. So everything is going to break down eventually. When you do composting specifically, you can make it happen a little bit faster. And that's the idea with having a compost bin or one of those roller things that turn. So you're trying to just break all this down, and you have lots of good organisms in there that are helping. The heat helps. It just makes really good stuff. So, and compost can be done well so that it's not smelly, it's not gross, it's not unsightly. And we have lots of publications on how to best go about composting. So you've gotten your spot, you've gotten your soil ready, you've tested, you're ready to go. Let's put some stuff in the ground. So a couple of different ways to do that. First of all, think about what it is you want to plant. Start with the things that you like to eat. If you know you don't like tomatoes, then there's probably not any point in planting tomatoes. I will tell you that if you plant a little bit of squash, you will come up with a lot of squash. So you may not want to plant a lot of squash plants. Or if okra is one of your favorite things, super easy to grow. Or plant some stuff that you don't even know anything about necessarily. You maybe seen it in the grocery store or at a farmer's market, and you want to experiment. When my kids were young, we always picked something new every summer to plant, and they didn't always love the things that we grew, but they were more likely to try it and more likely to like it if they had if they took part in picking it out and actually planting it and taking care of it. So it can be fun. It can be it can be nutritious. It can be cost saving to an extent. We'll talk about that in a minute. But have some fun with the things that you're planting. Couple of different ways that you can plant stuff. Some seeds are best planted directly into the soil. And that's direct planting. And you can see there, the person's putting the seeds, they're putting a lot of seeds in those rows. So I'm not going to recommend you doing that. We'll talk about how to do that in a minute. Some people do the seeds indoors, and that takes some planning, because you've got to start the seeds early enough so that they're big enough when it comes time to plant them in the ground. So starting seeds now in late March, you're probably not going to be able to have them. Like maybe you could start some tomato plants for planting in late summer, because we can actually have kind of 2 seasons of tomatoes and some other plantings. But what you do is look at the seed packet and see how long it generally takes those seeds to germinate, and backdate from the time you want to plant to the time that you need to start the seeds indoors. And it takes special grow lights. You're going to have to take some care with watching out for them, making sure they have enough water and that light, and then hardening them off, bringing them outside for a little while at a time so that they can get used to the fluctuations in temperatures outside, since they've been taken care of inside for a while. Or you can buy these transplants that are there on the left from a gardening center, or some people grow them and sell them to people, but they've already done that work in figuring out when to plant the seeds and germinate them inside or in a greenhouse. And here they are ready for you to plant. Some plants are much easier to do that way. And so like a tomato plant, you would not plant the seeds in the ground. You need to transplant them. So it's already a little seedling when you put it in. Oh, let's go back. I think I'm going the wrong way. Okay, so I mentioned watering. It is super critical that your plants get consistent water. And if you rely on rain here in North Carolina, that's not going to be enough, because like I said, we do have periods of time where we don't get consistent rain and water. So they need at least an inch of water a week. You can measure that with some kind of small can, like a tuna can in your garden, to see how that's happening. Or there are commercial water gauges that you can buy to find out. But you want to know how much water you're putting on that. And what we want to do, that consistent watering, when it goes down, this says 6 inches down, when you water that much, it goes down to feed those roots. And you're promoting your root growth to go down when you do those long waterings once or twice a week, rather than watering just a little bit every day. So you're not having to do it every single day, but you need to have a schedule and work around what Mother Nature is doing for you as well. I mentioned earlier that if you have grass and weeds in your garden area, that's competing for all the nutrients and the water that your crops need. So make sure they're out of there. If you're going to use an herbicide, we really want you to follow the directions on the bottle or the container, so that you are mixing it appropriately and safely. These are chemicals. They are toxic. They're meant to kill things. So you need to be super careful with them. Read the directions. There's a lot of them in the small print, so make sure you're going to take the time to do that. I'm not real good at details like that, so my husband is the guy who mixes all the chemicals. I'll spray, but he has to mix them for me. So I'm using his gifts where I need them. But if you don't want to do chemicals in your garden, and understand too, if you're using organic products, those are toxic as well to a certain degree. So you need to be just as careful with those. But you can also manually get rid of your weeds. You can pull them. You can use a hoe or some other kind of garden implement to dig them up. And you need to be careful in any method that you use that you're not disturbing the plant that you want to keep. So you don't want any of the sprays to get on the plants that you want to keep, and you want to make sure that when you're hoeing things, you're not chopping down the wrong thing. We have a fun story about my sister hoeing up actual okra plants instead of weeds, and my grandfather having quite the conniption fit. But she was young; she didn't know what she was doing. But get rid of the weeds. Inevitably, you're going to run into some problems in gardening. If you plant it, they will come. So you will have some pests that show up. There is a school of thought that says if these are things that you're going to be eating, you want to be super careful and maybe not use any kind of synthetic herbicides, pesticides, because that may be going into your body. Again, organic controls are a little bit healthier in that regard, but they're not completely safe. So you need to be careful there too. The biggest thing with controlling any kind of pests and diseases are to know exactly the problem that you're trying to tackle. Because if you're using the wrong product at the wrong time or for the wrong problem, you're just wasting money and spreading stuff out into the environment that doesn't need to be there. Master gardeners are happy to help you try and identify any problems that you're having. There are some that are kind of known for plants, but like tomatoes get blossom end rot often. And some are unique, or not unique, but more unusual. We have a plant and insect disease clinic that that the state has that is happy to help as well. But if you want to start with the master gardeners, you can call us. We have a helpline. That number will be at the end of this presentation. We'll be happy to help you try and identify what's going on. And taking pictures is really helpful as well, because if we saw this picture, we would be able to say, oh yeah, we know what that is and how to take care of it. The biggest way to combat any kind of diseases and pests are to keep your plants healthy, because the weaker the plant is, the more of an invitation it is to these things to come in and take over. So healthy plants is number one. We also recommend that you rotate your crops, and that means planting them in different spots around your garden bed, because the plants will let me say this right, the pests and the diseases that attack that particular plant, and some of them are very picky. They will only pick certain crops to attack or that they can eat. And if they will stay in the soil or stay nearby, and if you move those plants around, you're kind of tricking them, and they would have to walk a little bit further to get to your plant, and hopefully they will stay healthier longer. Attracting beneficial insects is good. So having lots of other plantings in your yard that's going to attract other insects is good. You've probably heard of buying ladybugs and releasing them and things like that. That's good, but the ladybugs don't know that they're supposed to stay in your yard necessarily. So it's not always cost effective to do something like that, but to make your yard an inviting place for all sorts of insects, and to know which ones are the good ones and which ones are the ones you don't want to keep, because you don't want to be killing any of the beneficials. That's another reason you need to be super careful about any of the products that you use in your garden, because they don't discriminate and will kill both beneficial and harmful insects. And we want to keep the good ones around. We've all heard about bee decline, and that is in part because of overuse of chemicals. Not the only reason, but one of them. And then if you are able to use organics, oftentimes those are better for the environment as well and better for your plants. I mentioned diseases, and there we have some tomato blossom end rot there. Prevention, again, making sure your plants are healthy, making sure you're rotating your crops, planting your plants at the right time. Seed treatment just means making sure you're using viable seeds. They do have a use by date on the packaging, so that's a good thing to keep an eye on. If they're old, they may not germinate as well, or the plants may be a little bit more compromised and not as healthy. Making sure your plants have good nutrition, which means all the soil nutrients that they need. Sanitation means keeping your stuff clean. It's recommended that you clean your tools regularly, especially if you are having to cut back some diseased material. Then you definitely want to keep your clean your tools with a bleach, not straight bleach, but a bleach solution. I cannot remember the exact proportions of bleach to water, but we can help you with that. That's somewhere. I just don't know it off the top of my head. Solarization means using the sun to keep diseases at bay, because it will kill some stuff. So that's one of the reasons you're in a sunny location. And then plants are tested. That's one of the things that the Arboretum does a lot of, not necessarily vegetable crops, but all these plants are tested and the plant scientists are able to do lots of gene work on them, all that sciencey stuff that I don't know, but I'm really glad somebody does. And they develop crops, seeds, and plants that are more resistant to diseases. So we have recommendations of the varieties that do best in this area, because we do have, again, lots of drought. We have lots of humidity. We have specific insects and diseases that come or are here already. So things that are tested to work well here are going to be your best bet. And there will be a link at the end for you to get all sorts of information about that. And then using disease-free seeds and transplants, it's great to get stuff from friends, but you want to make sure that they have the same kind of standards for hygiene in their yard as you do. And if it's somebody that you're not sure about, you might want to pass and get something from a garden center or a person that you know is going to have good stuff. And then we always have our animals that we have to kind of battle. I have both deer and rabbits that love my yard. They think that I have planted quite the buffet for them. The deer used to be more of a problem, and now I'm seeing more damage from rabbits, which is really annoying because if you see one rabbit, there are hundreds, literally hundreds behind the scenes. So they can do a lot of damage really quickly. So fencing is one of the best things to do. There are products that are sold that say that they keep these animals away. The animals habituate themselves to just about anything. So you have to be really careful. You have to change things up. The best thing to do is to try and scare these animals and not let them get used to you or your yard. So you can't shoot them. Do not do that. But scaring them is fair game. Loud noises, lots of unexpected movements to keep them away from your yard. And they're basically running out of their own natural habitats as we build more and more and more. So they come to eat. The rabbit fencing oftentimes needs to be placed underground a little ways because rabbits are very, very good at digging. We all know that from Peter Rabbit, who got into Mr. McGregor's garden all the time. So, and it has to have pretty small holes because they can squeeze through just about anything. And deer can jump great distances. So the deer fencing has to be at least 6 to 8 feet to keep them out of your yard. So it's an ongoing battle. And there are some plants that are a little bit more rabbit and deer resistant. There's not anything that's really foolproof, but when it comes to vegetables and fruit things, they're fair game for any of these animals. Excuse me. One of the beautiful things about where we live is I failed at advancing slides, obviously. One of the beautiful things about our area is that because we don't have a super, super cold winter, and this year it didn't feel like we had a cold one at all, we have kind of 3 seasons to grow vegetables in. We have our spring garden, and those went in around February. And so that's kind of done. It says February to March, but we're almost into April. So these crops are usually going to be done by mid-April or so. And that includes carrots, kale, any of your greens like kale, spinach, lettuce, collards, all those grow in the cool weather. Peas, there are a lot of peas that grow, and Swiss chard, that's another green. But all of these things like it cool. So in February, before Valentine's Day, you can start these kind of plantings. And these can be done again in the fall. So September, October, you can be putting in some of these things and grow another round of these things. I will tell you that fall gardens sometimes are more challenging because you already have a lot of pests that have taken up residence in your garden, pests and diseases. So sometimes these crops have a harder time because they're combating the things that haven't gotten frozen out by winter. And then we have our summer garden, and these are our traditional summer vegetables like beans and cucumbers, corn, squash, tomatoes. Well, these are the things that you can grow by seed very, very easily. So those would go in mid-April to May and then grow through the summer. And then these summer garden things are usually done by transplant. So you already have the plant that you put in the ground. So those are your tomatoes and your peppers and your eggplants. Those are all in the same family of plants. So these are things that you want to rotate carefully because they do have some very specific diseases that will attack these plants. And so you want to be careful not to plant them in the same place every year. And so that goes for, you wouldn't put peppers back where tomatoes were or eggplants, and you want to rotate all them around. And then, like I mentioned, the fall garden. So those cool season things. You can also broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts. Those can be planted as well. Those are generally planted by transplants. But all these other ones that I mentioned earlier can be done with seeds. So, like I mentioned, the master gardeners have an office, and we have a phone line that we man almost all day long, 9 to 12, and then a lunch break, and then again 1 to 4. So you can call us there at 919-250-1084, and somebody is there and can look up information. One of the things that we do is provide research-based information because that's just the best way to garden, all the stuff that's scientifically proven to work. And we have the luxury of NC State right here in our backyard, and they provide us all of their research information. It's written up in ways that those of us that are not scientists can understand. And we have lots and lots of publications. So if you call us, we can help you find the right publication. You can also go online and Google a question and put in NCSU or North Carolina Extension, and our information will pop up. We highly recommend that you use information from NC State or some of our neighboring land-grant universities, research institutions like Clemson or University of Virginia, Georgia, any of those that are close enough to have very similar climates and kind of gardening years. So their information is going to be applicable here as well as their own states. Stuff from California or Minnesota, not so much, because they have such a totally different climate than we do. If you want to, you can also email us with questions at mgardener@wakegov.com. If there's another master gardener on the call, they might be able to let me know if our email changed. So I think that's the right one, but I'm not 100% positive. There are tons and tons of publications for just about anything you want to grow. Like I mentioned, we have the publication that recommends different varieties. And if you're just starting out, or even if you've gardened before and perhaps you haven't had great luck with some of the things that you planted, perhaps you need to take a look at that list and find things that are better suited to our area. So I can see that there are lots of numbers on the chat box. So there might be questions, Blake.
Yes, indeed. There are questions. And I just want to say I had to chuckle when you said you don't have to plant a lot of squash in order to get a lot of squash. I've gotten to the point where I no longer plant squash, and I still get too much squash because everybody else is planting squash and having to give it all away. So
yeah, I've seen a cartoon about people sneaking around at night, dropping off bags of zucchini.
Sure.
So that nobody knows. But yeah.
Definitely.
Either you have it or you don't. If you know, you know.
Okay. So one question we had was, are there specific materials for containers that you recommend when taking into consideration food safety?
No, not particularly. That is a good question, though. I've just bought commercial planters, and you may want to wash them out first in case there are some residue from the production of them or from shipping them. Again, make sure you have the holes. And if you're using clay pots, you need to be careful about the watering, even more careful, because that clay will let the moisture escape more easily. So if you're using clay pots, you're probably going to have to water them daily, because they're going to dry out so much faster.
For sure. So you did talk a bit about how to keep deer out, and somebody had a question about generally how to avoid deer. But what about deer repellent sprays? Do you know anything about those, if they're effective or not?
There are some. Again, I mentioned they get used to just about anything, and you've probably heard, if you're battling deer in your garden, you've probably talked to friends and you've got half a dozen or so different methods that people recommend and people swear by. The thing is, those deer will probably come back at some point. There are some, we can't recommend any specific products, but there's one that's made locally in Chapel Hill. I can't give you the name of it, but I've had a lot of good luck with that, and they make some for different animals. And I'm going to have to try the rabbit one, because the rabbits last year were so obnoxious. And it wouldn't bother me so much if the animals came and ate whatever they needed. But when the squirrels come through and eat a bite out of every tomato, that's rude. So, and rabbits tend to do that too. Rather than eating an entire plant, they'll gnaw it off at the base where it's tender and new, and leave all the remnants laying on the ground to make me cry. And it's like, if you ate one of these leaves, I could be patient with you, but mm-mm.
No kidding. The nerve of some animals.
Exactly.
Okay. Someone asks, can fresh young weeds no near seeding be put on compost piles? They always hate to waste them.
Yeah. So the way it works with a compost pile is, I mentioned that you need water and it creates heat. There is actually a lot of activity going on inside that compost pile, both chemically and with organisms that are chewing that stuff up. It's like a whole village in there, and you're turning it. Ideally, you would turn it regularly. And when you do that, you will find that the compost is actually really warm on the inside. It does need to heat up like that. That's a natural thing. And when it gets warm enough, it will kill a lot of those weed seeds. I don't know the exact temperatures that it needs to reach, and I've never checked the temperature of my compost pile. So weed seeds, there are some that I would not put in there. I would not put any stiltgrass there, because stiltgrass seeds are notoriously long-lived. But if it's stuff in my grass that is not terribly aggressive and I don't really care about, I don't worry about that. I put that in. If it's diseased plant material, I would not put that into a compost pile either, because you can't guarantee that it's going to break down well enough.
Okay. Someone asked, do you need to remove the cover crops when you're ready to plant for the new season?
It's a good idea to kind of turn them under if you can. They're going to naturally die out a little bit, so you can plant in them. Again, the more you turn that soil over, the more you're introducing more weeds into your garden area. So you may want to hand pull them out if they're in the way of you planting the new stuff, especially rows of crops.
Sure. And I would just like to add that it probably depends on the type of cover crop you're using. Like if you're using clover because you want the nitrogen fixation that it provides, the clover will fix nitrogen. But if you don't then work that clover back into the soil, then that nitrogen isn't going into the soil. So the clover you absolutely need to work into your soil. If, however, you're just growing like annual ryegrass just for the sake of reducing erosion, then in that case, you would want to use something. You would want to crimp it down. You use a roller crimper to crimp it down and like leave the grass there. And you can just plant in between the grass that you've rolled over and flattened. And the whole point of the rolling over and the flattening of the grass is to to suppress weeds there. So like you need the grass there flat to shade out the weed seed so that it doesn't spring back up. And you're more than welcome to just plant directly into the grass that you've left there. Okay. So someone asked about, well, they said specifically, why do my squash plants always die quickly? How do I keep vine borers away while still being organic? But you mentioned several things with regards to that. You mentioned chemical controls. You mentioned making sure you have healthy plants. And you also mentioned crop rotation. Somebody had an interesting question about crop rotation. They said, my garden is too small to rotate plants. Can you just skip a year and then replant them again? And is 1 year enough?
I do not know if 1 year is enough. That is going to help, definitely. You may want to try and do some containers that year and then move out. But yeah, you're right. A lot of us don't have a lot of space. So it's always a challenge for me as well. And I figure if I've moved them a little bit, that's helped more than not moving them at all. So, yeah, I would hate to miss an entire year of growing things, but yeah, that's a tough one. Yeah. Sure. I want to mention also the squash vine borers. Those are such a challenge. What happens is this moth lays its eggs, and right around the vine of the squash plant, and the insect is born and then bores into the vine itself. And your plants are fine one day, you walk out the next morning and they have flopped over. And at that point, there is nothing that you can do to revive those plants. I will be honest with you. That is so discouraging to me. I don't plant squash anymore because it's a real challenge. There are some methods, some mechanical methods where you put a cup around the plant when you plant it, or a part of a cup to try and keep them from getting to the vine. But there is more information from the master gardeners about all that, but that can be a real challenge, I will admit.
Sure. Okay. Someone's asking, can you use alcohol to clean smaller tools?
I believe so, yes. Yeah, any kind of, just make sure the alcohol is going to dry off. But if you're using anything else that's, a product for cleaning, make sure you've rinsed that off really, really well, because you don't want to introduce any of that into your plant material as well.
Okay. Someone says, I'm more interested in growing fenugreek and mustard. Where do I get this specific information?
I would start with master gardeners, and they can research and see what they can find. Mustard is absolutely beautiful too. So
sure.
I don't know the first plant that you mentioned, but
fenugreek.
We can research.
Yeah, I've used fenugreek in Indian cooking before, so it does have its uses. And my answer to that question would be, if you have the seed packets already for those plants, then the seed packet is a wealth of information on when to plant them and how long it'll take for them to mature and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, Blake. I didn't say that, but you do need to carefully read your seed packets, because they are going to tell you how far apart to plant your seeds, how deeply to plant your seeds. Not all seeds are created equally, and they have different requirements. How big the plants are going to be when they're mature, how long they take to germinate. So when should you expect to start seeing things pop up? And what their requirements are as far as sun and water and those kinds of things. And all that is really important information. They put that there for a reason. So make sure you read that. And I mentioned that the picture shows someone sowing a lot of seeds all together. That if you've got a whole packet of seeds, the inclination is often to plant them all. I bought them and I want to plant them. that actually does a disservice to the plants that you're trying to grow, because again, they're trying to compete with one another for all the good nutrients and all the light and all the water. So after you've planted, before they have their true leaves, which is that second set of leaves that comes up, if your plants are too crowded and they're closer than what the seed packet recommends, you actually need to go in and, horror of horrors, you need to pull out and thin those plants. Oftentimes it's best done by cutting them off rather than trying to pull them out manually, because if you try and pull them out, you sometimes disturb the roots of the plants that you want to keep.
Okay. Somebody's asking if you could go back to the slide that shows about composting. They just want to see that slide again, if you don't mind. And while you're doing that, I don't know what this is, but somebody's asked, what do you think about the square foot gardening method?
That is a really amazing way to garden. I've done it an adapted way. So
what is it generally? What is it basically speaking?
It's showing you how to, I don't know what my printer's doing. It's dividing your garden out so that you're doing succession gardening, first of all, and complementary plantings, so that kind of like when you do the Three Sisters gardening, you've got the beans or the corn stalk with the beans and the squash growing up together. It's that kind of thing. And so the premise is that even in a very small area by square foot, you can grow a tremendous amount of food.
Okay, so somebody's asking, well, they say I have chickens, and from what I've read, their poop is too hot to put in my garden unless it sits for a year. Is this true?
Yeah, that's why I was saying that compost for animal fertilizer needs to compost itself. And there are there's a schedule for different kinds of manure. So make sure you do look at that.
Awesome. Okay. And I believe this is the last question, but of course, there are going to be more that come in since I've said that. But how deep should the soil be in raised garden beds?
Oh, that's a really good question. Typically, at least 8 inches. And there is lots of good information on how to build raised beds. But yeah, they need to be able to have enough room for roots. Now, there are going to be some plants like corn comes to mind that needs a lot more space and probably would not work in a raised bed. But then I'm sure there are those of you who have done it in some way and had success. So, and gardening is a lot of trial and error. So we want to give you research-based information to help you be more successful, but none of this is guaranteed. Mother Nature and all these other things that we've mentioned want to chime in and sometimes thwart our efforts. And there are microclimates. So you may have a spot that is just not going to grow some things well.
Speaking of thwarted efforts, somebody's asking, how can I get out of control mint back into control? Their husband removed a barrier pot without realizing it. Now they've got a weed problem on their hands.
Yeah, mint is notorious for being very aggressive and very much a bully in the garden. So things in the mint family, it is recommended that you plant a container into the ground if you're going to have it in the ground, and have the mint in that too. And it will escape on its own. So it may not just be your husband that did that. You're going to have to vigorously dig it out, and it's going to take a while because that's just the way it rolls. And I've got bee balm, which is in the same family, that I'm still pulling out year after year because it thrives.
Okay. And this will be the last question, regardless of what other questions come in. They say, are there crops that you cannot rotate to another spot? Like if you have tomatoes in one spot, if you're moving cucumbers, is that bad? Or does it defeat the purpose?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I quite understand that about rotating.
So like if you're rotating crops, well, okay, I can't think of any specific examples to like gardening, but say if you're growing let's say you're growing tobacco in one spot in your garden, and then you want to rotate your crops, but you rotate tomatoes into it. But since they're the same family, they share a lot of the same diseases and stuff. So that wouldn't really be much of a rotation. So she's asking, are there like
things that you absolutely cannot plant back to back?
Yeah.
No, again, the best method is going to be to rotate, but we've already spoken to the fact that sometimes you just don't have the space for that. I think that I would look at trying to do some containers elsewhere, so that you can avoid having them in the same place. I don't know where the mulch thing is, so what I'm going to recommend is that with all these extra questions and these specific questions, call our hotline. And it's not really a hotline, it's just a phone line. But call us and ask, and we can send you the links to the information. Or like I said, you can Google some of this, but sometimes it's easier to talk to somebody and be able to talk this out and think through all the other questions that you have while you've got somebody on the phone. Or if it's in the middle of the night, it just dawns on you, email us and we'll be glad to get back with you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Leah, for doing this for us.
Yeah.
Thanks for stepping in at literally the last minute.
Well, thanks to everybody for staying on. I apologize for the snafu there, but I'm glad we got to talk gardening, because it's one of my favorite things to do.
No kidding. I'm in the same boat with you. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed this presentation put on by the Master Gardeners. I believe we will be doing this again next month, if you will give me but a moment to retrieve the topic. Yes, next month on the 24th of April, we will be talking about plant diseases. So I hope you all will join us for that. We'll see y'all next time. Y'all take care.
Bye, everybody.